The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
To explore and try, yeah. City villain number one, memory this night, yeah. Scandalous and crazy, makes it all worthwhile, yeah. Perfume smells like daisies, now my heart's on trial, yeah.
My cheek brushes against his, smooth on stubble for a moment, and then it's gone. He walks along the platform as if in a dream. Every fibre in me wants to shout and scream, stop, to run across to him and take him in my arms, to tell him I love you, you silly, silly man.
I know what it is to be broken and be bold. Tell you that my silver is gold. No.
Hi everyone, and it's another 50 Acres webinar today. Let me know if you are having any issues hearing me. I'm in a new location today. We've got a new office in Canberra, and so I'm just keen to know that people can hear me. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the box, the question box on your control panel, and I will take them as I'm proceeding. It's sort of easier that way. So very happy to answer your questions as we move along. So to get started, we're talking today about how to run a not-for-profit campaign in an election year, and obviously we're all wondering when the election is going to be on. There's also all sorts of theories about whether it's going to be in the next couple of months, whether the Prime Minister will try and head off a leadership challenge, or whether he will go the full term and have the election any time between now and May next year. It's hard to know the answer to that, and I wish I did, but I think what we can say is that it is certainly going to be within the next 12 months. I'd say less than that. It's pretty well known that most all the main political parties are on election footing, that's for sure. They're very much in that sort of campaigning mode. That's why the Prime Minister's at the moment going out and campaigning in the rural areas of Australia that are suffering drought. And, there's a good reason for that. They're all getting out there and trying to meet people and get the perception that they are engaged with their electorates. So it's an interesting time. Now, hopefully this will work. Great. So thanks so much, and please feel free to drop in questions as we proceed. Very happy to take any questions or comments or things as we go. And as always, these slides will be available on our YouTube channel called 50 Acres TV, and we'll send you the slides as well so that you'll have the slides and you can, at a time that suits you, listen to this time and time again. If you're that way inclined, you can. It's better than an amazing podcast listening repeats of this webinar. So let's get stuck into it. Obviously, there's a good reason why not-for-profits and organisations and associations want to run a campaign in an election year. There's lots of reasons for that. And some of you might already be doing some work, preparatory work, or you may have already launched a campaign. It's about trying to influence people to do something. Now, that might be around a policy direction of a political party, or indeed, all of the political parties trying to get them to commit to something in terms of a policy, or budget spending, giving you a grant, coming to the table to support you financially. It might be around advocating around a particular issue, raising awareness. Essentially what campaigns do is trying to get people to do something, influencing change, getting people to driving action in some way or other, even if that's just awareness raising. That is, driving action because you're getting people to be aware and thinking about an issue, obviously. So they're the sort of reasons that you might already be thinking about a campaign this year. What do you need to do before you think about running a campaign? Well, one of the things you do need to understand is the ACNC requirements and restrictions around political advocacy guidelines. I would urge you all to go and check the ACNC before you start speaking publicly around any issues. Organisations with charitable status risk disqualification of their charitable status if they promote or oppose a party or a candidate. You obviously can engage in an issue, you can talk about an issue, you can have panels and forums that actively allow people to talk about an issue, even in a very, engaged, active way, but you can't actively promote a party or oppose a party as such. So you need to be very clear on that. And so I would urge you all to visit the ACNC website and look for the political advocacy guidelines before you do anything. If you haven't checked them and you're already doing something, go and check them, is what I would urge you to do. So what charities can do? Well, you can comment on, this is straight from the ACNC website, you can comment on, promote or criticise the policies of any party or candidate, so long as such advocacy assists another charitable purpose of the organisation. You can release scorecard-style comparisons of party platforms on issues. You can host debates, and you can publish research on policies linked to its main purpose. So this is straight from the ACN website. Obviously, you need to, someone's just asked me a question. Is there a presentation? Hang on, I just need to see what the question is. Yeah, Sharon is saying you should be able to see the presentation. Is there anyone else that can't see it? If you're not logged in, you need to log in through the link that you got for the GoToWebinar. So you need to click on that. And I'm not quite sure why you can't see that. Is there anyone else who can't see the presentation? That's sort of what I'm going through now. I'm assuming everyone else can see it. Oh, you can't see it either. Oh, okay, hang on a minute. Okay, hang on, here we go. Now can you see it? That might have been user error, everyone. My apologies. I think you can probably see it now. So let me just go back quickly to these slides just so you can see them. I'll go back just briefly so you can see that. Sorry a minute. Hang on a minute. So this is the first slide, which we obviously wanted to concentrate on, the ACNC. I'm assuming everyone can see the slides now. The ACNC guidelines, making sure that you check those. And then these are the things that charities can do. Comment on, promote, criticise policies of any party or candidate, so long as the advocacy assists the charitable purpose of the organisation. So, for example, if you're a housing organisation promoting, supporting people that are homeless, I think you can be questioning and quizzical about parties' commitment to those issues, but I don't think you can probably actively promote a candidate or ask people to vote against them. So I think you can criticise them, but you can't actually ask people to vote for them. So make sure that you read the ACNC website. So how to get started and define your, so I'm just trying to find here we are. You can see it now? That's great. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about that. It was a user error. So how to get started, defining your objectives. We're back on track now. I have a coffee. It's all good. How to get started defining your objectives. What change, first of all, do you want to bring about? What are you trying to get people to do? One of the things that I think people often think about in an election year is they over-commit, they over-complicate things. You think that you can get people to activate on, say 10 issues or 10 different actions. Obviously, you've got to remember that there are a lot of other people doing exactly the same thing. They're all trying to get people to get engaged in a campaign around an election year. So maybe thinking about how you can simplify it. What's the really most important thing amongst the suite of changes or issues that you're trying to highlight? Focusing on one or two or one sort of area and then one activation, for example, that you want people to mobilise around. What issues are important for that purpose or for your purpose as an organisation or as a charity? And what are the hot button election issues this time around, and how can your issues dovetail into those? So you can predict some of those at the moment. If you were a consumer organisation, a consumer not-for-profit, or talking about the financial services or highlighting those things might be a good way of dovetailing into you highlighting, better rights for consumers, for example. Thinking about the issues that are key and how you're going to work in with them. What is the media going to cover already? I think is a good one. Obviously, the Prime Minister's out there talking to farmers at the moment about the drought. If you're involved with an environmental organisation, that's already been raised. There's lots of talk about women's issues in terms of the Me Too campaigns and then running globally and also in Australia through the Now Group. There's all sorts of issues that you can piggyback on as well and work in around the buzz and the talk and the conversations that are already going. So what's most achievable for you? Again, I say make sure that you don't have a huge long shopping list that you can't achieve. Make sure you have a shopping list that's really achievable, because there's nothing more depressing than having this list of stuff that it's great to be optimistic. It's great to have objectives. It's great for them to be lofty and bold. And I absolutely urge people to do that. I don't ever say don't think that you can't make it happen. You can always make it happen. But if you haven't started yet and just say there's an election in August, and it's entirely possible that off the back of these by-elections that are happening at the end of July, if the government wins one or two seats, that they might call an election that happens through July and the election date's in September. So if you haven't given any thought to campaigning yet, think about what might happen or what might be able to happen in that time frame. It really does limit the amount of things that you can do in that time frame. The election doesn't happen until May next year. You've got much more time, but we don't know when it's going to be. Unfortunately, we can't all crystal ball gaze. So we really have to sort of think about, if we've got a short time frame, a longer time frame, what we might be able to do in that time frame. So Parliament's obviously key to this, and during election campaign, all these people sitting in this room aren't going to be there. They're going to be out in their electorates, and it's very, people are still dropping like flies. There's still people there's a senator this week who may be someone who's come across from, I think, Family First to the coalition in the Senate, who may not be eligible to be in the Senate. Those issues continue to keep kicking on, but and it's a very interesting place. It'll be interesting to see how the by-elections go. And the other thing I think is interesting is that there is a redistribution that's happening this election, so that there are 3 extra seats, and they will all be seats that the Labor Party are expected to win based on the geographical location of those seats. So even if the government, say, won 1 or 2, if they won both of the seats they could take during the by-elections, they still are 2 or 3 seats behind going into this election. So they need to win 4 seats to win government. If they don't win any of the seats in the by-election, they need to win, 3 or 4 seats, 4 or 5 seats. So it's complicated, but essentially it's a very close run thing. And dare I say, I never would. You can't ever guarantee results, even though the government has been behind the polls, and I think 60 polls now, or more than 60, probably counting 63 polls. It is still, a very close run. If you look at some of the results of some of the polls, yes, Labor is ahead, but what is moving around is the independents and the cross-party support for cross-party parties. And so I think no one knows what's happening there and how the electorate will vote. And I think one of the things we can say about elections is that the nature of the electorate is such that they are questioning and willing to challenge the established parties and consider and actively support minor parties, independents, even mavericks like, whoever's presented in front of them, because they are cranky, disappointed, had something bad happen to them last week. They sort of treat it a bit like social media, liking and unliking a page. Politics has become the victim of, I suppose, our access to information. That's a sort of broader issue. So that's a bit about the sort of operating environment. What we need to think about is when we're actually running a campaign, after we've worked out what it is you're wanting to achieve, identify your targets. So understand the system and the decision makers, understand your public audience, who's going to care about what it is that you are talking about. In terms of government itself, there's the government, there's opposition, and there's crossbench. And those crossbenches are permanently on sort of rotating through one of those rotating doors in a large office block at the moment. You probably have heard just today, I think Cory Bernardi is talking about having a group of 4 now in the sort of broad, loose conservative coalition in the Senate, along with the One Nation guy who's just jumped ship recently. So things are moving in the Senate, but I think it is always worthwhile bearing in mind that they all have a vote. And the more people that you can have on side for your purpose, the more likely you're going to get that thing happening after an election happens. The benefit of having the crossbench or minor parties in support of you is that come the formation of a new government, whoever that might be, undoubtedly those parties, the party who's governing, will have to sit down with the crossbench. And what happens now, because of the nature of the crossbench in both the House and the Senate, they go to them with lists. saying, we'll vote on these pieces of legislation if you do this for us. And so if you can get some of those people on your side, then that is also helpful as well. It's work. It requires effort. But don't just think, I need to speak to the coalition and I need to speak to Labor. It's more complicated than that. And you really do need to think about who some of the other voices are that might support you, senators in your state, for example, or whoever they might be. So that's a bit about understanding the system and the decision makers. Obviously, your public audience is important. You need to be able to have them back you in. They need to, take your, support you through this process. It might be your members, your donors, broad supporters. Might be groups there might be coalitions of organisations who you mobilise for a particular issue. So think about how you might be able to get groups of people that are backing you, who will back in this particular thing or issue or campaign that you're going to launch. Building a case of, credibility. It's about establishing the need. I think no longer can we say to people, well, we need it because it's nice. People want to see that there's a need. They understand, we've got the information, we have the data, we've got access to monitoring social conversations, we have access to an enormous amount of information, and so we should be able to create a compelling reason why this particular thing needs to happen. Sometimes it's not as easy as that. For example, same-sex marriage, that's something that, yes, there's data around it. It's about really the data there, for example, would be who's supporting it and who's not. It's about saying that, more people are supporting it than aren't, for example. It's that simple for something like that. But for something like establishing the need for funding or a policy change, you may need to create a more compelling story around what that might be. Obviously, you need to be able to talk about what you've done, your history, what you've achieved, a bit about you. You need to be able to have all of that information ready to go and ready to supply to either your supporters, to the public, to politicians, and to the media. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, I think the simpler that you can make it, the better. You might need to have a landing page for something if you're going to do a campaign, an online campaign, the ability for people to log on, sign up, take action, press a button, send an email, do something. It doesn't have to be complicated, but I think the simpler that you can make it is the better, really, for you. And as I said before, consider collaborating with other organisations. It is strength in numbers, which is obviously good for you and good for the issue. It shares the cost, and it is a bigger, louder voice. And a lot of politicians are scared of networked, collaborating groups, coalitions of people, far more than they are concerned with, a small group of 150 people. If you can collaborate and you can create a sort of a mobilised group of 100,000, it's obviously stronger than 1,000. So that makes it's pretty obvious and pretty clear why that works really effectively. So building your own tribe, and that's what I mean about tapping into the people that you know are going to back you in here. If you're going to be running a campaign and it's going to be going between now and the election might be in May, might be in September. You need to have a group of people who are happy to do stuff, whether that is coming into your office, volunteers, to do real-time work. What is that? How can you get them in? It might be that you're getting people you're emailing your supporters and you're asking them to send emails. You're asking them to log on to a website and send an email to their politicians, to their local politicians, or to various ministers and shadow ministers. Making sure that you've got roles for your support base is really important. It's a real error to leave them without anything to do, getting them to do something, means that they're active, they're not going to be critical and sort of butting in and telling you what to do, but also you're giving them something, and it's going to probably grow your base as well by sort of encouraging those people to be active and spreading the word, which I think is always really helpful. So what sort of activities might work? I think there is obviously lots of different things that you could think about doing. Define your campaign activities is really important. You can't do everything unless you're really well funded. You've got a really big organisation or a lot of organisations in a coalition. Unless you've already started the effort and the campaign planning, it's really hard to do everything. So work out what's the priority. Is it about political engagement? Is it about getting on their radar for the election campaign? Is it about offering your organisation or some of the work that you're doing as a visual stunt or an event that politicians could visit? If you're going to do that, offer it to probably both parties. You might not want to do that, but it's probably a good thing to do so that depending on what the result is, you don't look like you put all the eggs in one basket. Is it about stakeholder engagement, and how will you do that? Will they be physical events? Might they be online engagements like this, holding online forums? Might be a forum on Facebook? Might it be a live feed on Instagram or Facebook? Might it be via YouTube videos that might be able to be, proselytized and pushed out? Is it via social media? Is it a holding page, a campaign website? EDMs, many of you might already have some of these things in operation. Think about how you can make them work and make sure that you can resource them. There's nothing worse than having a whole list of things that you think you may or may not do, and then you actually can't achieve them because there's only 1.5 of you in the office and you don't have any volunteers. So you need to think about what you can achieve and what you can afford, and that comes down to the last point here, an advertising campaign. I think a lot of people think that election campaigns have to be on TV, they have to have community service announcements, they have to go big, they have to be billboards. Well, they don't. They can be all sorts of things, and they don't have to be huge. Campaigns could be as effective as a campaign in one marginal seat, which is a pivotal campaign that highlights an issue and really drives attention to that issue, because it's a marginal seat that both parties are actively trying to win. The big issue in that seat might be, homelessness or whatever it is, whatever the issue is, and you're using that issue to highlight the issue. And because of the nature of the marginal seat, you get a lot of media attention. So, thinking about whether or not a micro campaign might work better, or is it more of a state-based, city-based, or national-based campaign, you need to think about how you can mobilise in the best way to work with your budget and your organisation. You can have public activations and protests and stunts as well, obviously making sure that you're not doing anything that's sort of violent or illegal. That's not going to help your cause probably most of the time. But legitimate, well-articulated protests that are perhaps colourful or engaged are, I think, helpful. You just need to think about what they might look like from the media's perspective when they're being filmed. Avoiding having people screaming down a TV camera or down the radio is always helpful. I think you need to be able to talk to people to get your view across. Yelling and screaming doesn't often help that in terms of the media. I'm all for protests. I completely support them, but I think you need to have an articulate message behind what you're doing, and you need to have a purpose for that protest and the activations as well. So what can you get your groups doing? What can you get people doing, your volunteers, and how can you react to what is happening out there in an election campaign? Because I think one of the things that we all know is election campaigns are not things that are predictable. And I'll tell you an amusing story. I used to work for the British Labour Party in the UK, and I was in charge of the London campaign. So I was in charge of 72 electorates or constituencies in London. And I was very focused on the marginal seats. There were 25 of them. And one of my marginal seat candidates called me when we were well into the campaign and said that his Conservative opponent would not debate him in an open forum, and he was very frustrated about that. And so he came up with an idea of, he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a dead chicken and I'm going to nail it to his his front door. I'm going to go into his house and nail it to the front door. And I urged him with my, I've got a law degree, and with my law degree hat on, I urged him not to do that. I said to him it would be trespass and that would probably be unwise. And so he said, okay, no problem, I understand that. He obviously cogitated on that and called me the next day and said, look, I know I can't trespass on his property and nail the dead chicken to the front door, but I'm going to nail it on the fence. And I again urged him not to do that, but he went ahead and did it, and he called the media, and it was a disaster. So it didn't help his cause. So sometimes election campaigns bring out activity and anxiety and stress and an immediacy, and people think that they can go around doing stuff because there's a limited period of time, and you've only got a limited period of time to achieve stuff. And so people do stuff they may not necessarily do at other times of the year. So you need to make sure that you're ready for that. You're ready for the fact that your organisation, some people might sort of fall off the edge and do stuff that you weren't quite planning for. Other organisations might be, might do stuff that you have to react to. The government might come up with a policy you might not agree with. And sometimes you just cannot predict all of those things. You just don't know. So you've got to, I suppose, be prepared for that, map the hot button issues, do a bit of an analysis of what might happen, what people might or might not do, where are the key marginals, where are the things that are going to happen that, you need to be ready for. And get together with the team and really think about the sort of scenarios and get ready with messages that you might use for some of those situations. How will you react via all of those different platforms that you need to react through? Social media and government, and also your stakeholders, your membership base. What would you say if something went wrong or you weren't something didn't go right? So, it doesn't have to be complicated. It might just be, jotting a couple of ideas on a piece of paper through to something a bit more complicated, but being prepared is always a really good thing. So obviously there's, a bunch of stuff that you can be doing now. This is one of the things that I wanted to just say, and this is the ACT Youth campaign, and this is not me saying that this is an extraordinary campaign, but what I'm saying here is that at the moment, you've probably seen these ads on TV, the election campaign hasn't been called, but the ACTU is starting to put the seeds of thought into people's minds around a campaign that they will be mobilising and gearing up with during the election, a bit like Your Rights at Work, which worked very well against John Howard when Kevin Rudd won some years ago. This is obviously the sort of basis for that, and this is where they're going to go with it. They're going to take that as a sort of basis and move it and develop it over the next 6 to whatever months they need. So thinking about how you might start something now, even if you don't launch the full-blown campaign now, I think is really helpful, because I think you do need to think about how you may have to gear up. You don't want to, use all of your, use it all now and have nothing to say when it actually comes to the election campaign. But you might be able to start to do some work around making some statements, getting some of this thinking already established. One of the things that you need to also do, and we're all talking about measurement these days, we're talking about how we can think about what you've achieved, because I think a lot of people think, well, isn't a campaign a nice thing? Isn't it good? We can make people feel happy and everyone feels engaged, and we can be walking around and we can go and, distribute leaflets or, go and go to events and talk to people. That's all great. But I think for your own, for the benefit of your boards, your funding, you might have philanthropics that fund you, you might have government funding. You need to be thinking about how you can measure what you're doing at all times. And I'm sure many of you are already doing this with some other metrics, media monitoring, for example, or other sorts of things, such as, getting in the back end of your website and measuring metrics. But some of the things you can think about measuring is the media, for example. Excuse me, how many stories, the audience size, key messages that might have come through, the social reach and engagement, the political and stakeholder engagement, designing a framework to measure new, for example, and strengthen relationships. So thinking about, where were you before your campaign started? What did you do throughout it, and where might that go? It may not be something that you can precisely answer right now in terms of government engagement, but what you can say is you've strengthened, you've established some new relationships, and this is some of the directions that they might head, which is always, I think, helpful for you to be able to report back to your supporters, your members, your donors, your boards, and your third-party supporters. So I think one of the things that you can also go back to, those earlier metrics were sort of very tangible things that you can actually precisely measure to some extent. Also think about your objectives and your goals. And I think don't be concerned or dissuaded if you sit down around the office and go, well, what can we achieve? Well, we're not going to achieve world peace in the next 6 months, so we may as well not give it a go. I think that's not the right attitude to approach it with. I think what you need to go is break it down and say, if world peace is the ultimate goal, we're not going to achieve that by January or by May, but what we could do to start that discussion about that issue is X or Y. We've established that as an objective and as a goal before we started this campaign. What did we do? How did we move towards that objective and that goal? And what sort of progress did you make in that direction? What have you learned from the campaign? Is it hard? What do you need to do? What direction do you need to head to make it work? And where might you be able to yield broader support, or support from different segments that you didn't get this time? It's not just a finite period of time, an election campaign. It's obviously a time of intense interest and scrutiny of politicians, government decision-making, political decision-making, and where that might head. But it is part of a continuum, and so there is a time before the election campaign and there is a time after it. And so I think you need to look at it in that way, and not think, okay, we won't bother, we won't be able to do it, we didn't achieve it. I think you can learn from what you do and what you might have had a go at in the election campaign, and just see it as part of a continuing campaign for your organisation. Obviously, one of the other things that I think you need to do is, when you get to the other end and you've got a big group of people and you brought them along with you and everyone is really excited and enthused and energised about what you have done and what you haven't done, well, not about what you haven't done, but what you've tried to do, I think it's about sort of mobilising and pointing out those successes, even if you may not have achieved world peace in 6 months. You've begun a conversation about world peace, or you've done something towards that lofty goal that you wanted to embrace. So it's about celebrating with your supporters and your stakeholders, your third-party supporters, about how you did, basically. What did we do? What did we get done? And you can do that in a number of ways, and these are pretty obvious: social media through EDMs and the phone calls, celebration events, and media outreach. So you can think about what you might do and how you might do them, but I think it is time to, pause for a moment and think about the fact that, yeah, we've achieved some stuff here and that's a really good thing, and let's pat ourselves on the back. Keep going, but it's a moment to pat yourself on the back. And the other thing that I wanted to say, and we're sort of moving towards the end here, so if anyone's got any questions, please just jot them down. Post-election's an excellent time to campaign and lobby. There's obviously a possibility that there be a new government. There might be the opposition might come into power. We might have a new prime minister if the prime minister doesn't win, for example, these by-elections coming up. There might be a challenge against Malcolm Turnbull. There might be a new coalition prime minister. It could be Peter Dutton, for example. And with that person would bring in a new front bench. If there's an opposition that have taken power, there'll be an entirely new, lineup of ministers and advisors. So it's an opportunity to think about how you can use those first few months when they will be thinking about new ideas, new directions, new programs, new opportunities, getting in there and going, what can we talk to them about? It doesn't just stop there. As I said before, it's a continuum, and you need to think about how you can then keep that conversation going. You've opened the door to some amazing relationships and connections, and so it's a really great time to just continue those discussions. It might be with media, it might be with government, it might be with third-party supporters, or you might have mobilised some amazing ambassadors or influencers. Even at a local level, you might have some great people involved with your campaign. It's about keeping them engaged and continuing to give them some stuff to do to back you in. So, as I say there in the last point, it's really, that's your job. You are a not-for-profit, you're existing for a purpose. It's up to you to keep that going, and you need to think and reflect on how you can learn from what's just gone, and what you might do moving forward to keep that discussion going and to take it in a new direction. Obviously, the intensity is not necessarily there. It's up to you to keep the focus and the spotlight on the issues that you're focusing on. But, that is your job. That's what you exist. That's why you exist, and it's effectively as your day job. So you need to give it some thought. So if anyone's got any questions, please do pop them in. We're about to wind up. Our next webinar in a month's time will be, I'm going to be interviewing someone who is running, or we'll be having a discussion about influencers and AI. It's called a Scrunch, and they are a website who are using and mobilising and tapping into artificial intelligence to ensure that organisations and corporates and brands match and meet and connect with influencers that make sense for them. So we'll be talking about influencers and AI through the experience of this particular platform, who are sort of leading the way in AI and influencer management. So thank you again for your time today. I'm really grateful, and thanks so much, Jessica, for your feedback. Again, sorry, that was really helpful. Clearly, hang on a minute, sorry. Here we go. These slides will be up on 50 Acres TV YouTube channel, so you just search 50 Acres TV. We'll send you the slides and we'll send you the link to the webinar so you can watch it again. If you don't want to watch The Voice tonight, you can watch this, which should be pretty exciting, I reckon. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. I hope you're all going to have some great fun engaging with campaigns. Campaigns are great. I love them. I've been loving them ever since I was a sort of little kid. Weird but true. But it's a fun thing to do. But making sure that you're fully equipped and ready for them is the way to go. So thanks so much, everyone. And I look forward to joining with you again at a future webinar. Thanks so much.